second strategy used by the media is that they quote the glorious Qur'an and other religious scriptures, but they quote it out of context. And one famous verse used is Surah Tawbah, chapter number 9, verse number 5. And Arun Shuri, one of the staunchest critics of Islam, he writes in his book, The World of Fatwas. And he quotes Surah Tawbah, chapter number 9, verse number 5. And he says that the glorious Qur'an says that wherever you find a kafir, into bracket is indicating Hindus, you should kill them. If you open the glorious Qur'an, this verse is mentioned that wherever you find a kafir, you should kill him, but it's out of context. For the context, you have to start reading from the beginning of the surah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about a peace treaty between the mushriks of Makkah and the Muslims. And this peace treaty was unilaterally broken by the mushriks of Makkah. And by the time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reaches verse number 2, He is giving the mushriks of Makkah an ultimatum, a warning that put things straight in 4 months' time, otherwise declaration of war. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reaches verse number 5, He's telling the Muslims to fight against the enemies, against the mushriks. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Tawbah, chapter number 9, verse number 5, that wherever you find the kafirs, wherever you find the enemies in the battlefield, you should kill them. But natural, any army general, in order to boost the morale of his soldiers, he will say, wherever you find the enemies, kill them. For example, if there's a war between USA and Vietnam, and the US Army General says that wherever you find the Vietnamese, you should kill them in the battlefield. If I misquote the US Army General, and if I say the US Army General is saying today that wherever you find the Vietnamese today, you should kill them, I would make him sound like a butcher. It is in context that wherever you find the Vietnamese in the battlefield, you should kill them. But natural, any army general, to boost the morale of his soldiers, he will say, wherever you find the enemies, kill them. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to boost the morale of the Muslims, He's saying, wherever you find the enemies, kill them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not say, okay, go run away. So it is in context. Wherever you find the enemies, you should kill them in the battlefield. We have several such examples. If you read in the Gospel of Matthew, a similar example is there. It is even mentioned in the Hindu scriptures. It is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, chapter number 1, verse number 46, 47, 48. Krishna is giving an advice. Arjun, he leaves down his weapons in the battlefield and he says that I would prefer dying, being killed unarmed, rather than fighting my own relatives. Further, it's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, chapter number 2, verse number 2 and 3, that Krishna says to Arjun, "O Arjun, how could you become so impotent? It is the duty of a Kshatriya, of a warrior, to fight. And if you fight, you shall enter the heavenly planets." Now, if I misquote Krishna and say that Krishna is saying to fight against your own relatives, and Arjun leaves down his weapons in the battlefield, he says, I would prefer dying unarmed rather than fighting my own relatives. So if I misquote Krishna and say that Krishna is saying that fight against your own relatives, it would be wrong. It is in the battlefield, wherever you find the enemies, you should kill them. So it is in context. And the master key for doing dawah to the non-Muslims, it is Surah Al-Imran, chapter number 3, verse number 64. "Ta'alaw ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum." Come to common terms as between us and you. Which is the first term? Allah na'budu illallah. That we worship none but one Almighty God. And Arun Shuri, after quoting verse number 5, he jumps to verse number 7. Why? Because verse number 6 has a reply to a sickness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Tawbah, chapter number 9, verse number 6, that if the enemies, if the non-Muslims in the battlefield, if they seek asylum, don't just grant it to them, escort them to a place of security. Any army general, the maximum he can do to the enemies, he can say, go, you are free. But the glorious Qur'an goes a step further and says that do not just grant them freedom, escort them to a place of security. Because there are chances that other people will attack them. So Arun Shuri and other critics of Islam, they skip verses and they misquote the glorious Qur'an. And if you go on the internet, you do not have to be a scholar to misquote the Qur'an. You'll find several allegations, but all of them, they are either mistranslations or quotations out of context. So such critics of Islam, they misquote the glorious Qur'an.